Diablo 4 Season 1 is right around the corner, and a lot of people, including myself, are super hyped up for it. But you might be sitting there wondering, what build should I play when this first drops? But don't worry, I've got you covered. I'm going to be going over one build for each class, so no matter what type of playstyle you have, you should be able to find some inspiration. Now before we actually get into the builds, we have to cover two very important things. First off, if you guys want to support my channel, please hit the like and subscribe button, it really does help me out. And the second thing is, some people might be sitting there saying, well, we don't really know any of the patch notes coming for Season 1, so isn't it a little early to be giving out best builds? And to answer that, yes, it is a little bit early, but the way that the Diablo devs have been going so far is they aren't really trying to nerf any builds out of the meta. They're trying to buff the ones that aren't as strong right now to allow for more build diversity. But the ones that I'm going to be talking about today are more than likely going to stay pretty strong, and they've been tried and tested, so it's going to be a great starter for you to farm some gear, get some stuff going, and then build a new one later on. So with that covered, let's actually hop into the builds now, and to start off, we're going to go with the Barbarian. And for the Barb, I would really like to go with the Whirlwind one because that's the one that I play, but right now, Hammer of the Ancients is just a much better, well-rounded skill, so that's what I'm going to be recommending you guys level. Hammer of the Ancient has some really strong upsides without having really major downsides. So first off, some of the pros are it has very low Fury cost. Fury is really tough to get, especially while leveling for Barbarians, so a build that has low Fury cost with a damage output that this one does is insanely useful. It is also extremely godly in group play. The Barbarian as a whole is just really good in group play because the shouts are just so good because not only are they buffing you, but they're buffing your group as well. But Hammer of the Ancients just piles on top of that because it has really good AoE damage with its big smashy smash. And then you got the shouts on top of that. It's just so good. Chef's kiss. Mwah. And another really good thing about it is all of the codex of power that you really need to get this build online is all found in Act 2. So if you haven't completed the campaign yet and you are going to be one of the people that is running the campaign again, then you are going to be able to find these dungeons very early on in the game and get those codex of power ready so that you can actually get this build online. Now for the people that have already done the campaign and they're going to be skipping it come Season 1, these are pretty close to Kyovashad, so you're going to be able to get them really easily as well, so it's just a benefit for you also. Now those are the pros covered, so now let's move into the cons. First off, it's melee. Barbarian, you only really are going to have melee characters, and that is a very big downside. Diablo 4 and pretty much every single other ARPG is not very friendly to melee players. There's a lot of stuff that can really screw you over, so it can be a little bit annoying. Next up, it is weak at the start. It's not as bad as something like the Druid, but at the start it isn't as strong as some other builds are right off the bat. You do require some certain aspects in order to actually get this build online, but like I said earlier, they're all found in Act 2, so it's not actually that bad. Now next up, it does have mediocre single target damage. This is more of a speed clearing build. You're going to be running dungeons, killing a bunch of elites, stuff like that. So against bosses, it isn't the best in the world. I do want to make this clear though, it's not absolutely horrible. You are still going to be able to kill bosses, and as you're leveling up, you should be in World Tier 1 to start off with. So it's not painfully bad, it's just a little bit weaker than other classes. And the last con, if you really would call this a con, is there is some positioning required. This isn't a completely brainless build. You are going to have to position yourself properly in order to get the maximum effectiveness out of the Hammer of the Ancients. But once you actually start to get a feel for things and really start to understand it, it is going to be like a second nature to you. So after, it's really not going to take a whole lot and it's going to be pretty easy, so just keep that in mind. Now this build is super well rounded. You can do a lot of different stuff with it. It's not going to be the best against bosses early on, but later on, once you actually start to get some gear farmed up, it does actually handle them well. You can also do some really strong PvP with this. You can speed farm with this. I really like this build as a Barbarian. Like I said before, I'm a Whirlwind Barb, but this would be my next go-to if I wasn't playing that. So if you're playing a Barbarian, this is the build that I recommend for you. But next up, let's move into the speedy dash and go with the Rogue. Now the Rogue has tons of different builds that you can go for, and they're all really strong. Penetrating Shot is really good for endgame bosses if you're looking to do some Uber Lila stuff. Barrage is really good at speed farming. Death Trap is just a really good all-around build. But the one for the Rogue that I am going to be recommending to you guys is just the straight up Twisting Blades Rogue. It is a little bit basic and vanilla and cookie cutter, but you are so fast in it. It's got really good AoE once you get the aspects. It's ridiculously strong, and it's very simple and straightforward. It's not a super complex build. Once you actually start to understand the different ways that you can use your abilities, you're going to be dashing all over the place, speed farming, and just setting yourself up extremely easily. So let's talk about the pros for this one. And first up, obviously, it's super fast. When Season 1 actually starts, a lot of people are going to be done the campaign, so they're going to be looking for a very fast build to get them online quickly, and this is extremely good. You have really high base movement speed with the different gear that you're going to be running, plus you have like 40 dashes in your kit. If you don't want to take a bunch of time running a dungeon, this is a great one for you because you're just constantly dashing from groups of mobs to groups of mobs. And that leads into the next pro, which is it's very good at just moving forward. A lot of builds in Diablo, you kind of have to generate a little bit of your resource before you can actually do a lot of the fun stuff. But with the rogue, you're able to dash in, hit them a couple times, dash away, the blades are going to come back to you, spin around, do more AoE. You don't really have to actually spend a lot of time with the groups of mobs because of the amount of AoE damage that you're going to be doing, so you can just keep dashing away. Next up, it's very well rounded. This build absolutely melts bosses once you actually are able to proc certain things. And this is actually the build that I started on when the game first came out, and I loved it. My life was so easy running through everything. I've rarely ever struggled on a boss. The only one that gave me trouble was Brawl, and I think a lot of people had trouble with that because Blizzard actually had to nerf him. So it doesn't matter if you're doing the campaign or not because you're going to have a very easy time with this build. There's so many good things that I could say about this, but that's going to take too much time, so let's move into the cons. And first off, it is slightly difficult to play. Now, I know that kind of goes against what I said at the start, where it was very easy to understand, but it is a little bit different. Easy to understand and easy to play are two different things in my opinion. But this bounces off the next couple of cons, so let's just talk about those and you'll start to understand what I'm saying. So next up, it has mediocre defenses. This is a very glass cannon build. You are trying to kill other things before they can kill you, and you just have to do it very quickly. This does have the damage to do that because you're going to be doing so much AoE, and you're also going to have a decent amount of CC along with it. But if you get stunned like one time, you're probably going to die. So that is a little bit harder for some people because, like me, I get stunned very often and it just kind of annoys me. And next up, it is a high effort playstyle. There is quite a few buttons that goes along with this because you are going to be constantly dashing, you are going to have to be managing your resource, you are going to have to be managing your cooldowns a little bit. It's a lot more hands-on than other builds, but the amount of damage that you're pumping out, it actually becomes a second nature and you understand the cooldown, so you're going to be getting used to it very quickly. And next up, it needs constant movement. Again, you're a glass cannon, you have to be jumping around constantly. If you stand still for an extended amount of time, you are probably going to die. So that is why it is slightly difficult to play. But again, once you kind of understand the playstyle, you really start to get in tune with it. If you really embody the rogue and you just don't want to stand still at all, this is definitely the build for you. I highly recommend it. It does so much damage, it farms everything efficiently, it's a great starter build. But now we can move into our next character, and that is going to be the Druid. Now guys, the Druid is very notorious for being hard to level. They're very slow, they require a lot of really hard gear to farm in order to actually come online. So Druids are going to be a very rough one to start out with. But if you have your heart set on it, then there is one that stands above the rest, and that is obviously going to be the Tornado Druid. Jumping into the pros, it is technically a ranged build because you are going to be sending tornadoes out at enemies. When you first start off, it's not actually going to be ranged though, because you are going to have to stand pretty close in order to actually hit the tornadoes, but once you find the seeking aspect, then it will be a little bit different. It is also pretty tanky with the different aspects that you're going to be getting, and Earthen Bulwark, you are going to be able to take quite a punch. So if you stand in a lot of stupid things like I do, it isn't going to be a big issue for you. It's also got really good damage uptime. Tornado is very good at doing a lot of AoE damage and doing it consistently, so it is very strong for people that are looking to have a lot of that consistent damage. And this one is actually pretty easy to understand. There's not a whole lot of buttons to it, you're just throwing out tornadoes, getting more spirit, throwing out more tornadoes. It's very to the point, simple, straightforward, and I do actually have a leveling guide on this channel. If you guys want to check that out, I will leave it linked. So if you want to level up a Druid, go check that video out. But now moving into the pros, it's a Druid, it's going to have low mobility. You're going to have your dash, obviously, that's built into the class, but other than that, there's not really going to be a whole lot. You are going to have one other different mobility tool that is going to be Trample, but other than that, it's not really going to be a whole lot of dashing around the place, and you are going to have to keep an eye out for stuff that is coming towards you. Next up, it doesn't have the best single target damage. Again, because this is an AoE build, it's more for farming dungeons, it's not going to be the best against bosses. It can handle them, and once you actually get towards the end game, it does melt them, but getting to that, it isn't going to be the best option for those. And I do want to put this here again because some people do get this confused. Tornado is hard to hit. Until you get the seeking aspect, which is not found through a dungeon, you have to drop it randomly. It is going to be a little bit hard for you to hit your tornadoes if you're not standing right next to the enemy. So if it's a teleporting one or a ranged one that just constantly moves away from you, it's going to be a little bit annoying. And the last major con is it does have pretty intensive spirit management. Most Druid builds do have pretty hard spirit management, but I do feel like I have to mention it here because, I don't want people to be confused. Now, while I am recommending the Tornado Druid for you, I actually might be going a different route with my starter. I've been having a ton of fun with the Lightning Strike Druid recently, and I think it's a fantastic build. It's not the greatest out there to start off with, but it's a ton of fun because it's just a really big AoE lightning strike that you're just calling down. It's super satisfying. I've been having a ton of fun, and because of the amount of fun that I've been having playing this, I might actually be using it as my starter because I'd rather have fun rather than be efficient. If you guys want a guide on that one, let me know in the comments down below. Moving forward though, try not to cut yourself on all this edginess that's going around because we're talking about the Necromancer next. And like the Rogue, the Necromancer actually does have a bunch of different solid options, but again, there's just one that stands out for the best. And that, of course, is the Bone Spear Necromancer. This has a ton of upsides with only a few downsides. The downsides are pretty major, but they're not going to be affecting you really that much if you like the playstyle. So starting off with the pros, first up, it's got great AoE. You've got Corpse Explosion, and then the Bone Spear is going to be splitting off, so if it's groups of mobs, it's going to be breaking up, hitting all of the mobs, coming back towards you. Basically everything in this kit is AoE. Next up, it's actually got really good resource management. Unlike a lot of leveling builds, you aren't really going to be struggling to get any of the resources that you need in order to spam out the Bone Spear. This is very rare, so it is a very welcomed addition. It also does allow you to have instant vulnerability against enemies, so you're going to be able to pump your damage numbers up extremely high, and that leads to our last benefit, and that is it has the best single target damage. If you want to melt bosses, Bone Spear is the one for you. It's got good clear time with AoE, but then you're also melting bosses with how much single target damage it also does. There's been times where I've been doing a world boss and somebody walks up and it's just a Necromancer and he just kind of one-shots it and then walks away, and I didn't even get to cast my shouts before it was dead. When you're playing a Bone Spear Necromancer, you're the type of person that you walk into a room and your dick's been there for 2 minutes. And it only gets stronger as you get more and more gear. But that's our pros done, so let's move into the cons. And first up, it is corpse reliant. There are some ways for you to generate corpses on your own, so against bosses it's not the worst. But when you first start off, it is going to be tough to generate the corpses on your own, so you are going to be a little bit reliant on that. Next up, it has no mobility skills. The only thing you have is the dash that's built into the character. So like the Druid, you're going to be very reliant on your dodging skills in order to not be standing in something that's going to get you stun locked. I personally don't like low mobility, so this is a very big downside for me, but a lot of people don't mind it, so, to each their own. Next up, you do need to sacrifice your summons in order for this build to actually be at maximum efficiency. And I know a lot of people that play the Necromancer play it in order to have a minion army, but the Bone Spear Necromancer is just a lot stronger than the Summon Necromancer, so it is better to just get rid of those. Again, that's a deal breaker for some people, but this is just the stronger build of the choice. And lastly, and kind of the main downside for me at least, is you have no health regen, no fortified, no barriers, nothing. This is, again, a very glass cannon build. You are not tanky at all. You're not going to be unstoppable. You're not going to have that extra health pool. You are just kind of there, bone out, ready to go. Now, for me personally, the Bone Spear Necro is just a little bit too clunky. I don't like a lot of the downsides to this, so I would never really play it. But I know a lot of people really enjoy the amounts of damage that this thing can do because it does a lot. So my best advice is if you're kind of thinking about this, maybe just hop on right now, try it out a little bit, play around, maybe level up to something like 10 or so, and just see if you can handle those lower levels, because as you go up and up and up, it's only going to get better, so if you can handle the low levels, you're going to be perfectly fine. And I saved the most interesting one for last because now we've got to talk about the Sorcerer. And the Sorcerer is the most interesting because this one I'm actually going to recommend you level with one build and then instantly respec to a new build once you hit level 50. So to start off with, we got to talk about the leveling build. This is going to be the Firewall Sorcerer. This is just such an easy, brainless leveling build. All you really need to do is get the rotation down, and that's about it. You're going to be clearing everything very effortlessly after that. I'm going to be rapid firing the pros and cons because we are technically going to be covering 2 builds, so let's hop into it. First off, pros, it has great AoE coverage. You're going to be dropping a lot of Hydras, you're going to be dropping a lot of Firewalls, everything is just going to be covered on screen, it's going to be just massive AoE. Next up, you have great single target damage because again, you're going to be dropping a lot of the Hydras and the Firewalls, so bosses are just going to be melted because those are going to be doing so much damage. And next up, it has a very hands-off leveling style because you're dropping the stuff that you need to drop and then you can basically just run away or get up and go get a drink or do something. It's very set and forget. You don't really have to do a whole lot. It's great. Moving into the cons though, it has very weak damage versus mobile enemies. A lot of this does rely on the Firewall and the Hydras, so if the enemies are teleporting around or they're ranged and moving a lot, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to get the damage out on those enemies. So it is going to have a little bit of finesse when it comes to those. Next up, it is low on utility. Barbarians have shouts, rogues have CCs, stuff like that. This one doesn't really have a lot of those options. And the last thing is you do require a few codex of power in order for this to actually be popping off. They're not awful to get, but they are required in order for the build to reach maximum efficiency, so while you are leveling it up, it is best to go target those once you actually can. But once you reach level 50, I do recommend speccing out of the Firewall and into the Ice Shards. Ice Shards is extremely strong, so let's hop into the pros. First off, it's very mobile. You're going to be able to teleport around, dash around, do a bunch of different things, take on multiple different angles. It's kind of like the Rogue, except the next pro, it's ranged. You're going to be able to shoot the Ice Shards out from a distance. You don't need to be right on top of an enemy. And Diablo 4 is not very friendly to melee characters, so if you can be at range, that is a major benefit. Now next up, it does have really high burst damage. You are going to be able to pump out a ton of damage very quickly. So these are kind of like 2 pros in one because with that high burst damage, it's also going to have great single target damage. You are going to be able to do a lot of bosses fairly easily. But that's our pros covered, so let's move into the cons, and like every other glass cannon build, it is squishy. Sorcerers don't have a ton of defensiveness, that's why you have teleport and dash, and you're so mobile, because when you're mobile, you don't really have to worry about getting hit by stuff. Next up, this build is very mana dependent, but once you actually have the right aspects, the right gear, the right setup, it's not as bad, and you can just keep spamming abilities out. Next up, it doesn't have the best AoE clear. There are different pieces of gear or different skills you could technically slot in to bring the enemies closer together so you can AoE them, but for the most part, this isn't going to be an AoE focused build. This is going to be more for the single target damage and just bursting enemies down so you don't really have to worry about the AoE, so it's not really a huge downside, but it is a con nonetheless. And the last con is you are going to have to respec. It is kind of a pain in the butt because the gear that you got while leveling isn't going to be the best gear that you need for this one. So it's going to be a little bit annoying, but once you actually start to get the gear rolling on the Ice Shards one, it is a fantastic build. But let me know what builds you guys are thinking about running in the comments down below. And if you guys want to stay up to date and support my channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.